Michigan Justice Chronicles with Dan Geherin takes you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes of criminal defense law, uncovering the strategies, stories, and stakes that define justice in Michigan.
Welcome to Michigan Justice Chronicles with Dan Geherin. I'm Tracy Merda, and I'm looking forward to sitting down today with Dan to dig into the Title IX and college discipline cases in Michigan. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tracy. I'm glad to be here.
I really want to dive right into, some of the things that are hot buttons, if you will, or just Title IXs in general are very confusing for us lay people. So you're based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And there happens to be a pretty big university there. Tell me how your law practice involves or is connected to the University of Michigan.
That's a great question. It's always been sort of informally intertwined with the university. So, right outside my window here, 5 minutes away, is a university that has not only 50,000 students at it every year, but it brings 100,000 fans to its football games every Saturday, 8 times a fall. Not only that, but if you go 5 minutes down the road, there's Eastern Michigan University with another 30,000 students. And then up the road an hour is Michigan State with 50,000 students. Add it all up, and you have thousands and thousands of people on campus. And if you think about campus and then you think about young people and inhibitions and impulse control and substance abuse, what does it add up to? It adds up to a lot of criminal justice on campus. And so from the time I started in this town. I was born and raised here. I've been practicing here for 25 years. Always there are calls that come from either college students or people who come to campus for sporting events or professors or employees of the university who find themselves in trouble. So without question, my practice as a justice attorney, doing criminal defense, representing young people in juvenile justice, doing Title IX and discipline work and some other work within the university. It's all sort of informally intertwined, and it's probably one of the reasons we're as busy as we are, having all of this university action just around us in this community.
Well, how relatable is this topic? I mean, I was a student, you were a student, we probably have children who are, starting university. Everyone can be affected by these charges. And I think it's so important too, and I'm sure you can agree, you're talking about young people who, have bright futures ahead of them and then all of a sudden do something stupid and boom, now you have a criminal record. So I was going to ask, how common are criminal charges brought against students for common crimes on campus?
Yeah, pretty darn common. I've got 2 college students of my own, and, I pray that they're safe and that I don't get that call that they're sitting in the police station, right, in order. But, it is very prevalent on campus. And you might say, well, what's type of crimes? What's most prevalent? Well, let's start first with obviously substance offenses, right? I mean, you've got alcohol, people being away from home for the first time, underage drinking, and then the decision making, which is already sort of questionable amongst young people, being affected. So you have a lot of substance abuse offenses. You have possession of alcohol, underage drinking, open intoxicants. Those are the minor league things. Then you have drunk driving, you have possession of narcotics, sale of narcotics. Anything in that substance abuse arena is sort of prevalent on college campuses. And then you have offenses stemming from substance abuse, fights at bars when alcohol is involved, criminal sexual conduct where people are taking advantage of other students if they're drunk and things of that nature. You have a lot of property and damage type cases if someone's mad at another student on a breakup. You get some domestic type things, young relationships, which are not always on solid ground. You might have some domestic violence and stalking cases. So there's no question that juveniles who have this, young people, I should say, college students who have this very bright future often find themselves sitting across from me in an office, staring down a felony charge, staring down serious misdemeanors that can gravely affect their future. So criminal cases on college campuses, probably more prevalent than you can even imagine.
Wow. So tell me about Title IX cases specifically. What is it and what are the potential penalties?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. We're one of the few firms here in town in Washtenaw County that handles these. And it's not an easy explanation, but I try it like this. Any school, university, college, or even a secondary school that is funded in part by the government, so a public school, has to comply with federal guidelines for gender. And so Title IX is typically thought of by people in the competition realm. Male and female sports have to be funded and treated exactly the same. But it's also gotten into the realm of sexual violence or sexual harassment or any sort of intimate partner violence that occurs on campus. So if there's a student that is harassing another student and the university believes that is because of gender, say it's a male harassing a female, they can bring that student on Title IX action. That means that they call the student into the university and a Title IX action begins. Now, what does that mean? In a nutshell, it means that there's going to be university-appointed personnel that investigate the conduct, take testimony from both the alleged perpetrator as well as the alleged complainant and any witnesses, and then the university makes a finding. If the university finds that you have violated their Title IX regulations, then you can be expelled if you're a student, you can be suspended if you're a student, you can be put on probation if you're a student, and if you're an employee, say you're a professor and you harass a student, you assault a student, you do something to violate Title IX, you're likely going to lose your job. You can lose your job, whether you're a tenured professor or a long-term employee or not, for a Title IX violation. Classic example, there was a football coach at Michigan State University a year ago who lost his job partly because he sexually harassed an employee or a vendor of the school, and the university found that he violated Title IX, and that was one of the mechanisms for how he ultimately lost his job.
How are these cases different from a university discipline case?
That's a really good question. So every university has Title IX regulations like we talked about. Every university, school, and college also has their own sort of guidelines or ordinances that you can't do while on campus. And there's usually booklets they give to these young students or they give to new employees to say, this is what you can and can't do. Read it carefully. And if you violate one of those regulations or ordinance, and it's not gender-based, it's not sexual harassment, sexual abuse, stalking, intimate violence, but it's something else, you can be brought up essentially on a discipline violation. If you're brought up on a discipline violation, it's very similar to Title IX. There's some differences in procedure, there's some differences in timeline, but ultimately the sanctions are the same. If you break an ordinance violation or a regulation at the university and you're a student, you could be expelled, you could lose your diploma, you could be suspended, you could be put on academic probation. And like I said before, if you're an employee, you could lose your job, you could be suspended, you could lose pay, all if you commit basically a discipline violation. And what we see as criminal justice attorneys is this parallel courts, quote unquote, system going on in universities that are often equipped with people who have no legal training, that are going on with not the same protections and procedure as a criminal or civil case. So it's very interesting as a criminal justice attorney when we handle discipline in Title IX to see the marked differences between those processes and the criminal and civil processes in the courtroom.
I was just going to say it's so interesting because it seems like these Title IX cases, they're not quite discipline cases. They're not quite criminal. They just kind of fall into this strange little crack that I'm glad you're here to explain for us. So tell me how the Title IX action differs from criminal cases then.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think the starting point is just the personnel and the names and the vocabulary, right? A criminal case, you're going to have a prosecutor, you're going to have a judge, you're going to have a defense attorney, you're going to have police officers, you're going to have ultimate sentencing and so forth. Much different language in a Title IX case. You're going to have a petitioner and a complainant and a respondent. You're going to have a university advisor, which is an attorney that's advising a client. You're going to have a hearing officer and not a judge. You're going to have sanctions and not a sentencing. So there's a lot of difference in language and personnel. There's also differences in procedure and standards of proof. And then probably the one that surprises students the most or employees the most is you never step foot in a courtroom. In fact, you rarely step foot anywhere in front of anything other than a camera. These entire proceedings are conducted by Zoom. They're conducted remotely. You're facing the loss of your ability to be a student, and you're facing expulsion, and the entire system is run through a computer and trying to question witnesses through a camera and remote system. So while the sanctions are serious in Title IX in discipline cases, while you can lose your money and lose your job and lose your status as a student, they pale in comparison to the sanctions in a criminal case where you can lose your freedom and go to prison and be convicted of a crime. But nonetheless, obviously very serious. just a difference in procedure, difference in names, difference in ultimate outcomes in those cases.
So are there often parallel criminal cases or investigations within those Title IX cases?
Absolutely, right? I mean, so if someone's brought up on Title IX, and let's say it's a sexual assault allegation, I'd say in the grand majority, 75 to 85% of cases I've handled at the Title IX level, there's an ongoing criminal case. Sometimes the Title IX case goes first and then criminal cases are brought. Sometimes the criminal case goes first. Sometimes they're running neck and neck, which makes it very challenging. But yes, because if someone thinks that they were assaulted, whether it be they were assaulted and they were hit, they were struck by a partner, or they were sexually assaulted on campus, most times they're not only going to report it to the university, but they're going to report it to the local police department. And then for the person charged with that or facing Title IX, they have to be careful too, because not only are they facing the sanctions of a university action and losing their ability to be a student and so forth, but anything they say there could be used in the criminal case and vice versa. So yes is the answer to your question. It is very typical and very challenging, not only for the person going through it as the respondent or the complainant, but for the attorney or advisors that are a part of those cases as well.
Wow. So it seems like a defendant and the attorney are going to have to be very careful in how they're walking through these cases or risk the other side of the case. Well, tell me about the role that you play when you're brought in as a defense attorney for a campus crime or Title IX action.
Yeah, so I'll divide those into two categories because you used the right phrase, defense attorney. If someone's charged with a crime, that's exactly what we are. We're a defense attorney, which is what we've done. I've done my entire career for the most part, and that's what I do day in and day out. I go into court with them, and I defend them, and I try to make sure I fulfill their objectives, whether that's to negotiate an outcome, control the sentencing, try to defeat the case, whatever. It's a different challenge altogether when I'm representing someone in a Title IX or discipline case because the university labels us as advisors. We're not to be called attorneys. Everyone's entitled to an advisor. And so as an advisor, your role is much different. We do not go into court, as I mentioned. We do not sort of become the fighting mouthpiece for a client in those cases. Instead, we're doing behind the scenes advising to the student or to the employee, and they are largely in front of the board or in front of the hearing officer on their own. We also are allowed to cross-examine, question the complainant in a Title IX case. That's the one role they've given to us. And I will tell you that that is dependent on political times. So for many years, we were not allowed to do that. And then under the Trump administration, the regulations changed and allowed us to do it. And then every 4 years, the political winds blow on what advisors are allowed to do and not allowed to do in Title IX cases. So that answer may change 4 years from now or even a year from now, but generally speaking, we're allowed to advise clients and cross-examine witnesses in university Title IX cases.
So I'm curious, Dan, what do you find? I want to look at both ends here. I want to find out, what do you find rewarding about these cases? And then what do you find frustrating about these cases?
It's 80% frustration and 20% rewarding, to be very frank. And I sometimes have lunch or get together with the other couple of attorneys around that I know do this, and we share the same frustrations. And I don't mind saying it because I say it publicly to the university. It can be a kangaroo court. They are constantly changing the regulations and their policies. The personnel, in my view, is not often trained properly to handle these types of cases. They're essentially handling high-level allegations of sexual assault or sexual harassment or battery and assaults, and they're often just social workers, or not just, but they are social workers, or they don't have training on how to determine whether someone's being credible or how to decipher credibility amongst witnesses. So there's a lot of frustration in the policy changes, the personnel, and oftentimes we're in the dark. The university changes things up. There's a lot of delay. I have had a case sitting here today in August of 2024. We've been waiting for a decision for 7 weeks. The case has been going on for about 9 months of a Title IX action, and there's no end in sight, whereas criminal cases have a nice definitive schedule to them. So yes, I've talked 80% frustration. The 20% enjoyment, helping students that are either in trouble or want our help bringing a case against someone else because they often don't have the slightest clue. They're anxious, they're young, they have other things to worry about. Helping employees sort of navigate the university system. So it's always rewarding to help somebody who is sort of an underdog and on their own. But these cases, more than any others, bring out the frustration in those of us that handle them.
Do you advise a student or employee who's going through any one of these processes that we talked about to retain their own attorney?
Yes, and use a good word, retain. The university, to their credit, most universities will appoint an advisor to a student or to an employee to have sort of a limited role without cost to that student or to that employee. And they're generally employed by the university or contracted by the university. So it's sort of akin to a public defender. And so someone can get an advisor as necessary. And yes, they would need to do that by all means. Should they retain a specialist? So in my view, you've heard me talk about the frustration. You've heard me talk about the consequences. So yes, I'm going to say without hesitation, if your student, your son, your daughter is at university, they're about to graduate, and they could be expelled, lose their degree, and lose $150,000 in tuition dollars, sort of puts in dollars and cents how important it is to have an attorney who's experienced and does this day in and day out to protect their students' rights. Same thing goes for an employee who's facing loss of a pension or a 401k, a job they love over an allegation. They're going to need someone that knows the system and knows how to navigate it. So without any hesitation, if someone can and has the means to retain an advisor for a Title IX or discipline action, I think that is without question a good strategy.
Wow, this has been a riveting conversation. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into Michigan Justice Chronicle with Attorney Dan Geherin. For more information or to connect with Dan, you can visit glgmichigan.com or find him on social media. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments. Dan, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.